Alright, welcome back everyone for another game analysis video. This is Blake with ChessPathways.com. Let's go ahead and get started. So this game was sent to me by a player with the username Soni777new. Unfortunately, we don't have their move-by-move commentary like we've had for the past two games. That is definitely very helpful for helping me get into the players' minds and help analyze why they're making mistakes. But we still have a lot to analyze here, so here we go. So Soni is black, and we start with 4 knights. And white plays this move, bishop c4, which is a fine move, developing a piece. But it's not the most popular move in this position, just because black has some kind of pleasant options here. And Soni chooses the one where you, the central fork trick, where you take this pawn in the center, looks like it's a piece sacrifice, but you get the piece back. Because after knight takes e4, d5. So black sacrifices a piece for the pawn, but they're going to get a piece back for a pawn here, and meanwhile white has lost their central pawn and black maintains one of their central pawns. So already black really has no problems here. White definitely didn't get an advantage out of the opening. Bishop d3, and here Soni played a move I've never seen before. I always thought with this central fork trick in the 4 knights, I thought you just take the knight, the bishop takes back, and material's equal again, right? Both sides have 7 pawns, both sides have exchanged off 1 piece. But black still has one of their central pawns and white doesn't, and black's just completely fine. Not like black has a big advantage or anything, but black's comfortable here. It's good for black. But Soni did not take back the piece right away. After white played bishop to d3, they played knight to b4 instead of capturing this knight. Which at first I thought this was just not good. I thought you're supposed to play takes just like I showed, and that's all I'd ever seen in that position. I thought the whole point of the fork trick was to do that. But knight b4 has some merits too. You're not going to lose a piece. You are going to get your piece back, because after this knight moves away, you have e4, forking the 2 pieces here, and you're going to get a piece back. You are going to end up down a pawn though, because you can't get the piece back for only 1 pawn, like you can immediately with just capturing the knight. You're going to have to give up both of your pawns to get the piece back, if that's what white wants. But you get some compensation for it. I checked this knight b4 move with the computer, because I've never seen this before, but it's interesting. The computer actually doesn't hate it. They like the other option better, just taking the knight right away instead of moving knight to b4. But black gets compensation here for the pawn. So I would be curious, Soni, is this something you have seen before and you had prepared this? This is something you knew about before the game? You just like this knight to b4 line, or did you come up with this kind of spur of the moment? It's kind of creative, right? Not taking the knight back right away and playing this move knight to b4. So let's see how it worked out. The knight moves away to g3. Now you have to play e4 because you do need to get your piece back. Black's currently down a piece. e4, queen e2, bishop to e7, just getting out of the way of that pin. If that's the case, I don't think queen e2 is a good move, because after bishop e7, black's just going to be able to castle, put a rook on the e file, and the queen's not that well placed on e2. The pin here doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. So queen e2, bishop e7, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes. So this is what I was talking about here. Black is down a pawn now. They had to give up both their pawns to get the piece back. They did get their piece back, but they're down a pawn here. But they have some compensation in this position, because after f5, white's going to end up with these doubled pawns here. And we get this position where white's up a pawn, but they have doubled pawns, and they have trouble developing their dark squared bishop. It can't really easily move. White's going to have to spend some time untangling himself, and black gets a little lead in development here. I'm not sure it's worth a pawn, though. Being down a pawn, especially with queens off the board, it's not so great to be heading towards an endgame down a pawn, but it's not terrible. I would recommend, though, I think I really would recommend, if we go back after bishop to d3. If you're going to do the central fork trick here where you give up the piece to get it back, I would recommend just doing it the normal way here. And it's equal material, you have the center, black's very comfortable here. You don't have to, be down a pawn and try to justify it with this compensation. Anyway, bishop f6, both players castle. Rook e1, bishop b7, so black's just bringing their pieces into the game. Rook to b1. Yeah, this is kind of what white has to do to be able to develop this bishop. And now bishop to b5. This is starting to feel pretty comfortable for black. White's having trouble really developing and keeping all their material together. And the 2 bishops are just very strong. The 2 bishops in a wide open position are usually better than the bishop and knight. Bishops can be a lot more powerful in these positions with a lot of open space. Knight to e5, defending this pawn. Black could win it back right away if they wanted to. I wonder if Soni considered this, because they played rook f to e8, and then f4. I guess you still have the chance after this, but if you wanted to, you could win your pawn back right away, like that. And I think Black has an advantage here now. The material's equal, but you're a little more active. In fact, the more I look at this, the more I think that White actually might be in trouble here, because what do? They have to play rook a1, and now after you contest this rook, the fact that this bishop can't move is really annoying for White. What do they play here? If they play f4, they're just going to lose a pawn, I'm pretty sure, because you can exchange and play rook e8, and White's in trouble here. So they shouldn't play f4, but if not f4, then what else? If they exchange rooks, you just get this nice open file, and you're going to be able to pin them on the back rank. They have to avoid the back rank checkmate, and now you're coming down. Yeah, this is really bad for White. So I think you missed a chance here. After knight e5, I really think you should just you should do that. You should take on e5, rook takes, bishop takes here, and just get this open file. White's not ready to contest the open file. Their other rook can't help because they're behind in development. It's a good example here of how to exploit your lead in development. You have to strike when the iron's hot. Going back to the game line, though, Black played rook to e8 first, which is a sensible move too, bringing that rook onto an open file. White plays f4 to defend that knight. Black brings their other rook into the game. And White plays b4, trying to get a path for this bishop to finally develop. And now Black goes ahead and does kind of cash in on their lead in development and better pieces to get their material back, kind of exchanging one advantage for another. Black goes ahead and exchanges off that knight to go ahead and win that pawn back. So after rook to b3, bishop e4, cutting off this rook and potentially threatening to win this pawn at some point, although you always have to watch out for the pin problems. Rook e3. Yeah, and here Black came up with this really creative idea to play a5 and then c5. Yeah, this is why I'd really like to have access to the player's thoughts when I'm reviewing these games, because I'd be really curious what the idea here was. This looks a little too creative to me. It's an interesting idea. I could see how this could work out in some middle game type positions where, you deflect the pawn away and then you play c5 for some tactical idea. But in an endgame kind of scenario, I'm not sure I like it. This pawn on a dark square is going to be a target for the enemy bishop, and that's kind of what happens in the game. White plays bishop a3, which I don't think is such a great move, because now Black can take on d2 and threaten this pawn, threaten g2. But I'm not sure why Black didn't play that move. Black played c4, and then White just gets to play bishop to d6 and kind of solidify everything. So my guess, if I had to guess what the plan was behind this pawn sacrifice, it was maybe to try to secure this d3 outpost for your bishop, where it can never be dislodged now. That would be kind of consistent with the c4 idea. But it's not worth it, though, because White gets this outpost themselves. White solidifies everything. Now White's up a pawn. I do like the creativity, though. Not too many players would think about sacrificing a pawn in a position like this. So, very interesting, just I don't think it quite works out. Yeah, Black plays bishop to d3. I think they really wanted this outpost on d3, but I'm not sure what the bishop really accomplishes there. Wow, and now White sacrifices the exchange. Yeah, that definitely can't be right. And these endgame kind of positions with plenty of open files, plenty of open space, rooks are just much better than bishops, because rooks are not constrained to one color. Rooks are perfect for attacking passed pawns and the square the pawn's going to move to. These files become really important once passed pawns start getting on the board, and it's a lot harder to hide from a rook than it is to hide from a bishop. Now Black is just... I don't want to say winning, but Black definitely has an advantage here. This passed pawn is not really a huge threat. The king's too close, the rooks are going to be able to stop it. It's just not a big deal. And if the pawn ever moves, this bishop's going to lose this outpost. I would have evaluated the position as probably a likely draw with the opposite colored bishops and the two rooks, and I don't think too much was really going to happen if both players played well, but sacrificing the exchange for White, which by the way, for those who don't know, when I say sacrifice the exchange, that means giving up a rook for the bishop. The rook's generally considered to be a more valuable piece than a bishop or knight. So when you give up a rook for a bishop or give up a rook for a knight, we call that sacrificing the exchange. When you do that here, I think Black is just really going to profit from this. The two rooks are just much better than the rook and bishop. Rook b1, rook d7, defending that pawn. King f2, king f7. Very important to keep in mind that in the endgame, the king is a very valuable piece. A lot of people are used to hiding their kings away, and that's good for most of the game. you definitely want to hide the king away in the middle game and the opening. But in the end game, when the queens are off the board, there's not many pieces left. You don't have to worry about checkmates. Let your king help. So king f7, king to f3. Black plays g5. I kind of like this move, just gaining space over there, blocking that king out of some squares. h3, king to e6. Yeah, this king is a nice blockader of the passed pawn. Rook b3, attacking and probably winning this d3 pawn. And here, Soni sacrifices the exchange. Soni gives up the rook for the bishop, which I don't like. I think that's bad for the same reasons that White's exchange sacrifice was bad. The rooks are just really good here. If I was Black here, I would play the move rook to a8, I'm pretty sure. It's very important to keep your rooks active in these endgames. You're threatening to win a pawn, and if White wins a pawn and you win a pawn, this is great. The lines are starting to open up. There's going to be tons of open room on the board. That's just going to increase the advantage of your rook over the bishop. And if White doesn't take your pawn, if White goes ahead and defends their pawn, you have all kinds of ideas here. Now that there's no more threat to your pawn, you can probably just play rook to c8 and swing your rook down to the second rank. You can play stuff like h5 and g4 and try to open lines on the king side and then swing your rooks over to infiltrate over there. The rooks are just going to be much better pieces here. So in the game, after rook takes d6, White took back, Black takes, and the rook takes on d3. And now Black just has to kind of defend this endgame where they're in a rook endgame, but they're down a pawn. So with that exchange sacrifice, I believe they went from a position where they had an advantage to a position where they definitely can't do better than draw. They're really just hoping to draw this endgame, unfortunately. So king c6, check. King b5, check. And Black doesn't want to take this pawn because they don't want to give the opponent access to the 7th rank here, where they could threaten more pawns. So king to a6, rook to b6. And now Soni goes ahead and captures this pawn. Yeah, king a7 might have been better, just kind of keeping everything compact and making it harder for the opponent to break in. Rook endgames are one of the easier endgames to draw when you're down a pawn. There's some endgames where it's really bad to be down a pawn, like pawn endgames. If you've watched my video on pawn endgames, you've seen how an extra pawn can often be converted into a win. Rook endgames, though, if you keep your rook active, you can try to defend. It's not a guaranteed win by any means to be up a pawn in a rook endgame. Black has excellent chances to draw this game. But anyways, king takes a5, rook takes b7, and now rook c8. Yeah, I wouldn't give up this pawn so easily. You can't really afford to be down 2 pawns. I know your idea is to come to the second rank and start picking up the white pawns, but this is where some endgame knowledge comes in handy. If you pick up those 2 white pawns, but white wipes out your whole king side, the connected passed pawns will be enough to win in the rook endgame. What I would do here is to play... I would probably play h5. Just trying to play g4 next and just trying to make sure that White does not end up with connected passed pawns. So let's see how this could turn out. Let's say that White... What's the best move here for White? It's not so easy to find. It's not so easy to find how White wins this game. Let's say that White tries to attack one of your pawns. Probably g4. The pawns get exchanged off. White has to watch out for your rook coming down to the second rank. I might even play h4 now and try to exchange off another pawn. And I think Black has good chances to draw this, honestly. These pawns could be very weak. Even if you exchange off both of your pawns for just White's 1, I could even see some situations where you can draw this down 2 pawns, possibly. It's probably a stretch. But you definitely have to avoid the situation where White gets connected past pawns. So rook c8, rook takes h7, and here it says Black resigns. I think that's a bit of an overreaction. Which seems like a bit of an overreaction. I don't think I would even resign here if I was playing a master or someone. So I definitely don't think Black should resign here. What would I do here if I was Black? I don't think it's too late to fight back. Let's bring our rook to their second rank. Now what will White do? We're not really threatening this pawn yet, by the way, because they have the skewer. So we can't do that. We are threatening this pawn, though. But it's still not entirely clear to me how White converts this. Let's say... Oh, I think this might be a problem. Because now they're going to pick up our pawns, and it's going to be exactly what I said. This doesn't work anymore, where we can start exchanging pawns off, because they can take with check and pick up our pawn and get connected past pawns. Okay, so let's not play rook c2 then. Let's play g4. Let's actually sacrifice a pawn here. We're sacrificing a pawn just to make sure White doesn't get connected past pawns. I think this would be worth a try. We're going to get a pawn back. At least one pawn. But this is probably lost for us now, I think. Yeah, this is probably lost because our king is so cut off. This is winning for White. nonetheless, especially at the the sub-expert level, I definitely wouldn't resign here. I would make white proof this. Now we're probably going to be able to win this pawn at some moment, but with our king being so cut off on this file, the white king shouldn't have any trouble kind of facilitating this pawn's path to queen. Alright, that was definitely an interesting game. I really wish I had more access to the player's thoughts. Soni, you made some really creative moves. That knight b4 in the opening, very interesting. This pawn sacrifice later in the game, this a5 followed by c5. You had some very creative ideas. The exchange sacrifice later in the game. Unfortunately, I don't think any of those three ideas really quite worked out the way you wanted them to. But it's impressive to see that level of creativity. I would just say definitely value rooks a little more in those open positions. You don't want to be sacrificing the exchange back like that. And you definitely resigned too early. Definitely try to fight back in those positions. Even down 2 pawns in rook in games, it can be tricky to convert that to a win, especially for players who aren't, experts, masters, grandmasters. Make your opponent earn it. Alright, I will see you all again next time. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.